of Destiny. Part 2. Beyond the Walls. Chapter 5. A Change of Heart. In a few days, Mylo would decide it was time to leave the walled fortress and continue his journey to River's Edge as originally planned. The king's irrational behavior had convinced Mylo that it would be best to leave without anyone noticing. With the money Burdock had given him, Mylo purchased the provisions he might need and set off early the next morning. He had often gone on walks with Jack during his stay, so his departure appeared unremarkable to anyone who might have seen him. As he traveled down the road, guided by the map he had found in his room, Mylo's mind swirled with thoughts. He reflected on the friends he had made, the comfort of a warm bed, the regular meals, and the promises he had made, each tugging at him. The weight of his commitments to Burdock and the bonds he had forged here left him conflicted. Yet, the pull to return to his friends was undeniable. I do want to go to River's Edge, but it is an awfully long way. As strange as things may be here, I do like these people, even the king. What do you say, Jack? Said Mylo. I tend to feel as though we should stay, but I'm willing to go wherever you think we would find happiness. And besides, we have had our fill of adventure for a while. We know there is comfort and stability here. We know nothing of River's Edge, Jack replied. Mylo nodded. Then it is settled. I'll send Burdock a letter as soon as we're back. He'll understand. With that, they turned around and retraced their steps, deciding to stay. Weeks passed, and Mylo soon forgot about writing to Burdock. Instead, he began working a few hours each day at the local blacksmith shop. Determined to pay his own way, Mylo also started crafting his own sword. The blacksmith, Udis, worked closely with him, guiding him through every step of the process. They even ventured to a local mine to gather iron, ensuring the sword would truly be his own creation. Once the metalwork was completed, the blade was mounted on a beautiful teak hilt. To finish, the sword was set with garnet, red beryl, and ruby, casting a warm, reddish glow reminiscent of the first light of dawn. The sword was nearly complete. In Midlandia, it was customary for warriors and knights to name their swords, much like wizards named their staffs. Losgrel's sword, for example, was called Frithiend, meaning defender. Following Udis's urging, Mylo named his sword Schema. There was just one final step before the sword was truly finished. It needed to be blessed. Udis sent Mylo to the village shaman for the blessing, a practice common across much of Midlandia. The path leading to the shaman's hut wound its way south, around the edge of the fortress, and continued for about half a mile before it veered into a small, thick patch of forest. The shaman's hut was easy enough to spot. A campfire burned brightly beneath an old iron pot, sending tendrils of smoke curling up into the air. The aroma from the pot was strong, earthy, yet not unpleasant, mingling with the scents of the surrounding forest. All around the hut, plants and herbs hung in the air to dry, their leaves swaying gently in the breeze. The hut itself was simple but cozy, a round structure made of intertwined sticks and animal hides, built to blend harmoniously with its natural surroundings. Mylo stepped closer to the door, hesitant but determined. Hello? Is anyone here? He called, his voice betraying his unease as he stood on the threshold, not quite daring to look inside. Out of the shadows emerged a rugged-looking man, his dark hair wild and tangled, his skin covered in tattoos. He wore furs that seemed to blend into the natural surroundings and adorned himself with bone jewelry, which clinked softly with each movement. I am here, the man said in a deep, gravelly voice. I am Faorn Holland, though you may call me Alderian, if that's easier for you. How can I help you today? My sword. I was hoping you could. Before Mylo could finish his request, the shaman's gaze fell on Jack, and his eyes widened in astonishment. You have an elephant? He exclaimed, his voice filled with wonder as he hurried toward the large creature, eyes fixed on the magnificent animal. Mylo, slightly amused by the shaman's reaction, smiled and shrugged. Well, he belongs to his own self, he said, gesturing toward Jack. Alderian continued to study the elephant, his fascination growing. Of course, he murmured, as he circled Jack, inspecting him closely. He bears a scar. A recent wound. It has healed nicely, though, Alderian added, his tone impressed as he gently reached out to touch the scar. Jack, sensing the attention, stood still, allowing the shaman to inspect him. He looked down at the shaman with steady, intelligent eyes. The shaman paused, his gaze lingering on Jack as if attempting to reach some deeper understanding. Does he understand what I say? He asked, his voice filled with curiosity and awe. Yes, every word, Mylo replied, his tone matter-of-fact. Jack is full of surprises. Alderian looked up from the elephant and nodded, his mind clearly working through the implications of such an extraordinary creature. I haven't seen an elephant like this in many years. You must be from the lands to the west, he mused, his voice reverberating with awe. Jack is from Fervent, but I come from a land far to the east, Atlandia, Mylo answered, a faint pride in his voice as he glanced at Jack. Alderian's eyes brightened, as though a memory stirred in his mind. Yes. You resemble someone I once knew from those lands, he said, his voice thoughtful. Jack, you said was his name? Alderian asked, turning back to Jack with a sense of reverence. Yes, Jack Majongo, said Mylo proudly. Alderian, still entranced, nodded slowly. Strange. I cannot seem to communicate with you, Jack, he said in a low, almost apologetic voice. He then turned to Mylo. But enough about your companion. You came here for something, didn't you? Something about your sword. Yes, May I see it? Alderian interrupted, his curiosity shifting back to the task at hand. Mylo, a little taken aback by the shaman's enthusiasm, carefully drew his sword and handed it to Alderian by its hilt. The shaman took it with reverence, his hands studying the blade with practiced care. Very nice. Excellent craftsmanship. This sword should serve you well, Alderian commented, his tone approving. I could bless it if you'd like. Yes, I would appreciate that, Mylo said, his voice steady, a flicker of anticipation in his chest. Alderian's lips curved into a faint smile as he handed the sword back to Mylo. Very well. Have you given it a name? He asked. Yes, Schema. It means, Mylo began, but the shaman quickly finished his thought. Dawn's first light, Alderian said with understanding, his voice soft and reverent. He motioned for Mylo to follow him into the hut. Inside, the hut was modest, with a low ceiling that barely allowed Mylo to stand fully upright. Herbs and dried plants hung from the rafters, filling the air with an earthy, almost intoxicating aroma. The scent of incense lingered in the atmosphere, blending with the rich, organic smells of the forest outside. Sacred objects and mysterious trinkets were scattered about the hut, adding to the aura of ancient wisdom that seemed to permeate the space. Alderian moved toward a small iron stove at the center of the room, placing a pot on it and filling it with water. As the water began to simmer, he added a bird's feather, some dried herbs, and a substance Mylo couldn't identify. Taking the sword from Mylo, Alderian held it carefully over the pot, allowing the steam to rise and envelop the blade. He murmured prayers under his breath, the words flowing in a language Mylo didn't understand. The air thickened with a strange, almost tangible energy as Alderian held the sword there for several moments. Finally, he placed the sword into Mylo's hand and guided it back into the sheath at Mylo's side. With his right hand still touching Mylo's hand and the sword, he inhaled deeply and placed his left palm upon Mylo's forehead and spoke another prayer, one softer and more intimate than the last. They both closed their eyes, standing in silent prayer. Mylo felt a strange warmth, colors of red, orange, and gold seemed to swirl around him, spiraling over the sword, engulfing both him and Schema in a wave of light. The sensation lasted for what seemed like an eternity, but when it faded, Mylo felt as though something had changed, as though the sword and he had become forever intertwined. After a long moment, Mylo opened his eyes to find Alderian slumped in a chair, exhausted from the ritual. Your sword is complete, the shaman said, his voice heavy with weariness but satisfaction. Mylo, though he had always been skeptical about magic and blessings, felt a strange sense of connection to the sword in his hand. Schema now felt more than just a weapon, it felt like an extension of himself. Just as he and Jack had formed a bond over the past year, he and the sword had become connected in some deeper, almost mystical way. After thanking Alderian and leaving an appropriate donation, Mylo and Jack headed back to the village. Mylo's thoughts drifted toward the concept of magic and what it truly was. Was it the power of the gods? Did magical people possess godlike abilities, or could they command the gods themselves? Perhaps all the words that Alderian and Burdock spoke when casting magic were commands, summoning the gods to act. As Mylo mulled over these questions, a sudden thought struck him. Burdock, the letter. I've forgotten to write to Burdock. With that realization, Mylo hurried back to the village and, as soon as he could, wrote and sent the letter off with the next day's mail. Losgrel and Longfellow had been treated better than expected in the palace jail. Though they had been imprisoned for 2 days now, they were well fed and allowed ample time for recreation. Their meals were delicious, though the source of the meat served to them remained a mystery. Despite their confinement, they were guarded well, ensuring that no one in the prison would dare harm them. One day, a guard came to their cell and ordered them out. The king wishes to see you, he said gruffly, ushering them through the stone halls toward the royal chambers. Inside, the same translator from before stood waiting. He spoke to the king in hushed tones before turning back to Losgrel. We have confirmed your story and verified the authenticity of your letter. The kingdom is grateful for your actions in stopping Prince Raybor, but we cannot help you. Give your wizard friend this message. Though we sympathize with your plight, we must remain neutral. Our country has not, for 100 years, involved itself with the northern land and their quarrels and sees no reason to change its stance at this juncture. Losgrel's brow furrowed. His voice was calm but firm as he responded. Ask the king if he would feel the same if we had failed to stop Raybor. Would he not seek revenge, then? Would he wait for the COL to indeed strike Tyrevent? Because it is only a matter of time. The translator turned to the king, and a quiet conversation passed between them. The king's voice was distant when he spoke through the translator. The king says he does not concern himself with what-ifs. He thanks you for your actions and apologizes for your detainment. As a gesture of goodwill, he offers you one favor. Losgrel nodded thoughtfully. We intend to travel to Wolflandia to seek their aid. We request a safe escort to their border. The translator relayed the message, his face unreadable. The king grants it. However, he warns that you may not have any better luck there. Usheme arrived at the local inn and checked in for the night. His plan was simple: stay just one evening, have breakfast in the morning, and be on his way by the time the sun rose higher in the sky. The inn's back lawn was scattered with tables and chairs for guests to enjoy their meals. Usheme sat at one of them, eating his breakfast while watching the wind whip through the tall grass. It swayed in waves like the ocean, bending and shifting in the gusts. He chuckled as a fellow guest ran after his hat, which had been caught by a sudden blast of wind and sent flying across the lawn. Well, it's almost time, Usheme thought, lost in the rhythm of the moment. Just then, a young innkeeper approached him with a polite smile. Is there anything else you need, sir? The man asked, but his gaze lingered on Usheme's face. A flicker of recognition passed across his features. You look just like Usheme, he blurted out. Usheme's heart skipped a beat. His eyes darted around, but there was no one close enough to overhear. He shook his head quickly, trying to dismiss the notion. No, you must be mistaken. The innkeeper wasn't convinced. You're as tall as he is, and your hair, it's auburn, just like his. I've seen you every year at the festival in the walled city since I was a boy. Why aren't you there now? What brings you to this humble inn? His voice carried a note of awe, mixed with confusion. Usheme lowered his voice and leaned in slightly. Please, keep your voice down. No one must know I'm here. I'm grateful for your faith, but I cannot stay. He pressed a coin into the man's hand as a tip, trying to close the conversation. The innkeeper's eyes brightened. My entire family follows the teachings. It's how we changed our lives. My ancestors came from the ghettos of Railsville, and with faith and hard work, we saved every cedro to buy this inn. You've done so much for us, sir. I can't wait for this year's festival to see you again. You're such an inspiration. The man's words struck a chord deep inside Usheme. He stood up, his posture straightening with a newfound sense of purpose. No, he said softly but with sincerity. It is I who should thank you. He raised his hand in blessing, his voice carrying the weight of his gratitude. Then, without another word, he slung his pack over his shoulder and began to walk away. Where are you going? The innkeeper called after him. Back to the walled city, Usheme replied, his voice filled with resolve. Something had changed inside him. The realization had dawned. If lives were to be laid down in pursuit of righteousness, then so be it. That was the true calling, to awaken the free will of the people, to show them what was right, no matter the cost. His journey had shifted course. His stride grew faster, more determined with each step, though a pang of longing for Napari tugged at his heart. He loved her, but that was a luxury he couldn't afford, not when his people needed him. Perhaps, in time, the custom forbidding village fathers from romantic involvement would change, and maybe then Napari could join him in the walled city. But for now, he had a mission. 2 days of hiking brought him to Idriaxis Pass. Exhausted, he collapsed onto a bench and fell into an immediate, dreamless sleep. He awoke to the sound of voices. A few townsfolk had gathered around, their faces lighting up with recognition. They greeted him warmly, eager to hear why he had left, and why he had returned. Before long, a small crowd had gathered, their curiosity piqued. Usheme found himself speaking, his words flowing with a fervor he hadn't anticipated. As if guided by something beyond himself, he began to preach, his voice growing in strength with each passing moment. The teachings of his faith, it seemed, were more welcome than he had expected. The people were ready to listen. It became clear to him then. It wasn't yet time to re-enter the walled city. Not until he had gathered a following beyond its walls, in the neighboring villages, to spread the word, revive the faith, and raise awareness of the injustices that were unfolding. And so, for the next several weeks, Usheme traveled from village to village, preaching, teaching, and building a network of followers. His mission was now larger than he had ever imagined, reviving a religion, stirring hearts, and preparing for the eventual return to the walled city when the time was right. After his stay at the Baruni monastery, Burdock felt refreshed and renewed. There were no great revelations like he had hoped, but his mind was clear, and his body was rested. The last night of his stay, he dreamed he saw a large field of rye. A terrible blight started in the middle of the field and began to spread out, threatening to destroy the entire crop. He went to the farmer and told him of the blight. The farmer showed him some special seeds. These seeds will yield rye that is immune to the blight. The farmer tied a sack of the seeds to a giant bird which flew over the field and dropped the seeds over it. What if it doesn't work? Said Burdock as he turned toward the farmer. Just behind the farmer was a raging bonfire, larger than any he had ever seen. As he pondered the meaning of the dream, it suddenly became clear. Strive toward peace, but prepare for war. Raller, he thought. Now he may be able to help with that. He said goodbye to the Baruni monk and thanked him. Ahuli, began Burdock. I would like to ask a favor. Can you check in on my Meredith from time to time and make sure she is okay? Yes, we certainly can do that, replied the little creature. Thank you again. I must get going now. I must go and find Raller the Wise, said the Red Wizard. Another one of the Baruni fetched Burdock's horse, bringing it out to him, and soon he was off to go and see Rowler.